Hello, I'm Amy Gutierrez with UCSF Health. We're going to share a story of a young man whose only hope at survival was a double lung transplant. Born and raised in Hawaii, Bradley Dell was an infant when he was diagnosed with severe cystic fibrosis, a genetic disorder that progressively damages the lungs and digestive system. And over the course of his life, Bradley battled one infection after another. He was so sick that no hospital was willing to perform the surgery he desperately needed. But when doctors at UCSF Medical Center received a call about Bradley, they knew they needed to push the boundaries of what defines a transplant candidate.
People are freaking out right now because of the coronavirus. All these people wearing masks and sanitizing like crazy, and I just thought, wow, they're finally getting a taste of my medicine. I remember the first time I even realized there was a cap to my life. In 7th grade, I'm sitting there and we're learning about genetics, and teacher says open up to page 305 or whatever, and I look down and right there it describes cystic fibrosis, and it says most don't live past, I think at the time it was like 18 years. I knew it killed me, but I never seen a number that I could remember until then.
You and I are breathing right now. We take it for granted. We don't think about it, right? My patients, they can't even eat. They cannot get up without, getting out of breath.
Baby brother?
I was born with cystic fibrosis, and about 2 months into my birth, I started starving.
You have had us so worried this month. We lost almost 2 pounds, and you've been seeing all kinds of doctors trying to figure out what's the matter.
Rick and Lisa, thank you so much for taking the time to do this with us. We want to get your perspective on this. I was hoping we could kind of start at the beginning, leading up to that diagnosis, and the difficulty as a parent. Your child's losing weight, you don't know what's wrong.
At first, they had me stop breastfeeding because they thought maybe he wasn't getting enough calories or maybe he was allergic. Then they tried a few different formulas, and the same thing, his weight just kept going down. And after a couple of months of this, they began asking us if we were feeding him water instead of formula and if he was being cared for at home the way he should be.
The doctors thought, maybe my parents were neglecting me and starving me intentionally, and so they called CPS on my parents.
It was hard, just knowing something was wrong and not being able to figure out what it was, and then being questioned if we were doing the right things as parents to take care of Brad.
When you get the news that he does indeed have cystic fibrosis, is there a sense of relief, for lack of a better term, that now you know what's wrong?
Yeah, it was sort of a relief in that now we knew what we were dealing with, but then it was reading about, what CF is, and at that time, the very short life span of a child with cystic fibrosis. It was kind of a kick in the gut.
He was diagnosed with cystic fibrosis when he was 5 months old. Cystic fibrosis is really an obscene disease. It begins as a single gene defect, and it makes the fluid in the lung that should be clear thick. Sticky airways and sticky mucus is the best description. In fact, they have the same problem in the GI tract and the same problem in the pancreas and other tissues. They have to clear mucus all the time because the mucus builds up, and it lends itself to infection, which then causes more damage and more mucus, and it's a cycle that goes on all their life until they just run out of viable lung tissue.
When I'm explaining CF to people, I usually kind of start with, one, it's not contagious. It's something I was born with, and it results in a bunch of lung function problems because you get infection after infection, and so it's kind of like having 4 flus at once that you keep for years and years. And it also leads to digestive problems where I can't absorb all the calories I need to, and it's hard to gain weight. To some people, I'll let them know that it's lethal. It depends on the person and what kind of relationship I want to have with them.
We had to do the normal life coaching, but also all the additional things that go along with the disease, not only the physical stuff, but a lot of emotional coaching along the way because of the feelings of exclusion and things that he had.
There are days where you feel like you're fine, and in hindsight, I realized I was just normalizing everything. That the pain that was never ending in my stomach, the pain every time I breathed in, it became something where I just accepted that is what it is and it's not going to go away.
Probably the hardest thing, obviously no one wants to see their child in pain, but in his teenage years when he was in his rebellious state, not wanting to do the treatments, a few times said he'd rather just die. We wanted so much for him to own the disease and to have, a positive outlook to see past the disease.
People were worrying about grades and I was worrying about trying to catch up while missing 2 to 3 weeks of school. And it was always just growing up and knowing something was wrong with me and other people not really realizing that. I was really alone with this disease. I definitely began to normalize being poked and prodded and stabbed a lot by doctors. It's not the disease that sucks, it's the treatments that come with it. And also knowing that, yeah, it's scary to dream. It's scary to think about, oh, why am I wasting time in school? I don't even know if I'm going to graduate college. I don't know if I should even be dating because I don't see myself ever having a family without feeling guilty about it because I'm just going to drop off one day. And so, yeah, it's very hard to think about these things growing up.
On a piece of paper, Brad's case was as severe and as bad as it gets. Severely malnourished. He was literally skin and bones.
Doctors very much said, we're running out of options, and we're running out of options is the last thing you want to hear as a patient from your doctor. To see doctors say, I don't know what to do. That's scary. So they said, there's one medication and we think it's necessary. You will lose your hearing. I lost my hearing about 3 months before my graduation from college. Basically, it burned all the hair cells out of my ear.
Well, in black and white, it was kind of easy. You lose your hearing or lose your life. It's basically how it was presented to us. But, we know everything isn't black and white, and, there's consequences.
Without any music, without hearing the voices of my mom and dad, that was very hard for me. In that summertime, started getting steadily sicker and sicker. I went into the hospital in June to get cochlear implants placed so I could hear again. When I went in for the surgery, my cystic fibrosis doctor said, I'm having bad vibes. I don't think you should go through with the surgery. And we said, vibes? So she said, I want to put you under observation in the ICU. Turns out that I was having septic shock, so basically the sepsis was beginning to lead to the shutdown of all my organs. They started telling my parents he's not going to make it. There's a small chance he's going to make it out of here. And I just thought, this is it. I'm definitely going to die. So I spent about 44 days in the hospital just trying to get my energy back, and doctors started pumping me full of nutrition, trying to get me to gain weight. And all the while, my doctors start calling transplant centers. They have that very scary talk with me. Like with parents, you fear the sex talk. With doctors, it's the transplant talk. Every CFer, we feel like that's a taboo topic. You don't want to ever talk about transplant. It's scary. It just means inevitably, you're going to be prolonging your suffering, which is inaccurate.
Our doctor here is Dr. Gould, and she was relentless in making phone call after phone call, trying to get people to accept Brad for transplant. But she would have to tell them his long list of problems. And a lot of those caused him to be rejected from all of the other places.
All of them said, oh, Brad is way too weak. He has a super bacteria and we don't ever transplant with that bacteria. And he's deaf. How is he going to recover and listen to instructions and everything if he's deaf?
I don't know of many programs in this country that would transplant someone who has his infection. Nobody would touch it. There is shortage of organs. If you take a bad case and you're going to have a bad outcome, you just wasted a set of lungs that could have gone to someone who could have had a good use out of it.
We knew we couldn't stay in Hawaii. Our doctors here didn't feel that, he would ever have a chance for a transplant, thinking that there wouldn't be any hospitals that would take him.
My doctor made one last call. It was the University of California at San Francisco.
Brad's pulmonologist in the Hawaii Medical Center sent me his information saying, would we consider someone like that for transplant? I reviewed the case. She sent me a whole detail of his history. This is so much thickening that he looked like a terrible candidate for transplant. But he was on the verge of death. Transplant was his only option. So I cautiously responded and said, I don't see any absolute contraindications, but I'm going to review the case with our pulmonologist.
It was a long shot mainly because of his infections. He was a real high-risk case.
Then we started getting videos of Brad.
Hi, I'm Brad.
Showing how active he is.
They want you to be healthy enough to go through all the transplant recovery. So I shot a bunch of video of me hanging out with my friends and doing all these various exercises and whatnot.
And there's something you can't measure about somebody, no matter their weight or their muscle strength. I don't mind being referred to as old school, but he had a twinkle in his eye.
Here it is.
And that video knocked everybody back on their heels. I can tell you, there wasn't a dry eye in the room here when that was shown.
Just a few weeks ago, I wasn't even able to walk, not even able to climb stairs. And here comes the finale.
It turned out that the video was very pivotal in, saving my life.
We've been having better than expected outcomes in the country for last 9 years in a row.
You started midodrine to come off the vaso.
A lot of the transplants we do are from patients who were in the intensive care unit hanging by a thread. So word gets around and we get all kinds of challenging cases that have been turned down by 3 or 4 centers in the country, like Brad's case.
The confidence of the whole staff gave us hope that Brad was in the right place and that he was going to get the lungs and that it was going to be successful and he's going to live a long life.
I felt like at each step of the way, I was like, wait, are we still going ahead? Then we would address the next, wait, are you still taking us? We felt like, wow, it's too good to be true.
The doctors, sure enough, they said, we want to take Brad on, and that was very surprising to us, but very welcome news. And they said, but, probably going to be 5 to 9 months wait because you have a rare blood type. And so we thought, okay, and I'm thinking, I'm not sure I can survive to then.
If it did take the full 6 months, there was probably a very good possibility that his lungs wouldn't carry him that far.
My parents are very, very strong individuals. My dad was in the Army, so it comes with the job. And my mom always has a smile and this laugh, and it's always like pep up. But there'll be times where I see her cry too, and there's nothing like seeing your mom cry. And one time saw my father cry, and that broke me. Five weeks later, we hadn't bothered packing the go bag because it's not even close to 5 months, and we get the call.
We were lying in bed, still awake, and it was really late, and we got the call, and it's like, oh, they're offering some lungs. So we let Brad know. Of course, he was deaf, so Lisa had already typed out a note on the computer, and we woke him up and showed him the note, and so what do you want to do? And he said, let's do it.
Can you describe what you felt like in the car ride to the hospital?
We felt like everything was going to be okay. The only time I got emotional was after he was wheeled back, and I went on Facebook and I saw his post that said something like, I may not make it through this, but know that I loved my life. And then I started crying because I'm like, oh my goodness, he might not make it through this.
They brought me into the OR. So I'm just staring at this operating light, and, of course, I can't help but think, is this what heaven is like? I went to sleep, just very emotional and praying for just something to happen that, if I die, my parents would be comforted, or that I wake up and I'm breathing again. Because I didn't feel like I'd breathed for months.
From the very beginning, he hit the operating room. We couldn't find any veins in him because he'd been on intravenous antibiotics for like 6, 7, 10 years. So everything was used up. So we started the case like that how are we going to put lines in him? Because any place they tried, it was very difficult. And then once we got him lined up, I opened the chest, and it's very typical for cystic fibrosis patient to be very stuck, like they're socked in, their lungs are socked in. It's like cement inside, you're chipping through cement. In his case, with his infection, Mycobacterium infection, it was even more of a challenge because you don't want to have any spillage of the infection by poking holes in the lung and having spillage into the chest. So it took me almost 1.5 to 2 hours just to try to dissect the lungs out. There was no place to put your hands in because the lung is completely scarred to the chest wall. But we got through it, and surprisingly, no spillage of infection.
My next memory is a piece of paper put in front of me. It says, "Hi Brad, it's January 16th and you have new lungs."
Even after 15 years of doing this, when I finish putting organs in, I'm holding my breath until the patient takes their first breath on the table.
I can tell you, she holds her breath because you can't predict what's going to happen. I mean, in the operating room, right outside the operating room, in the ICU.
When you come out of the operating room and you take the breathing tube out and they take their own first breath, it is amazing. His story has been remarkable from the beginning.
He was, I would say, one of the by far sickest patients we've ever transplanted.
In the entire memory of my life, I don't remember being healthy. There's always something, some infection or stomach problems. And once I had recovered from transplant, I was obsessed with taking deep breaths. I think a lot of doctors think when they're doing a transplant, they're saving a life. And yeah, that's true, but they're also starting a new life. Before my transplant, I didn't dare to dream. I'd given up on saying like, I'm gonna be this or that career-wise. But after my transplant, I started thinking maybe it's okay to dream. And that brought a lot of joy and really good feeling.
That's what we do it for. We hope that every single patient can do that. And I love to see them out and about. I mean, I get pictures from people, rock climbing, surfing, diving even, to my chagrin. But if you come to my office, I have a whole 2 drawers dedicated to all these pictures and cards that I get. I have every single card I have ever received.
So far, my transplant has been remarkably smooth. She looked at everything in my file and she said, if you trust me, you can have a long lifespan. And I thought, like, a lifespan? I've only heard life expectancy. She was just staring at me and she had typed that out on the computer because I was deaf. And I just told her, I trust you, because I'd never met someone who was as confident that I could live far than her, including myself. So my outlook is now, I'm thinking far into the future and I'm setting up all kinds of plans and even looking into a 401k. UCSF also gave me cochlear implants, and that was about 9 months after my transplant.
That was icing on the cake. And I was with him at his first appointment when they turned on the cochlears.
January, February.
Just the emotion of him responding to spoken word.
My brain had to adjust to using the implants, but just sound itself was amazing.
I wasn't at the appointment because they weren't supposed to turn them on that day. He called me on the phone and it was a surprise to me, so yeah.
And he could hear your voice back on the phone.
Yeah.
His lungs are functioning great, and in terms of his outlook, cystic fibrosis patients have the best outcomes after lung transplant of any other indication that we transplant lungs for. So I would hope that he's got many, many, many great years ahead of him.
It's hard to go through a death experience and not love people more. After my transplant, I just had so much love for people, and I just wanted to do everything I could for them. I had recognized the fragility of life, and I don't know how much longer I'm gonna have, and that was proven 3 years ago when I almost died. And so how am I gonna make every second count? I realized I hadn't yet laughed my biggest laugh before transplant, and I hadn't yet tasted the yummiest food before transplant. I went from being this couch potato to, adventuring everywhere and taking every opportunity I could to really relish this life and make the most out of it.
I think he's done a lot of, self-reflection and understands that, it was the sacrifice of someone, dying. And then, we see that gift living through Brad and the reach that he's had in other people's lives because of, his own journey, but equipped with the lungs of a donor.
It shows us that there was a purpose to everything, I think. Everything that he went through is now being used for good in some way.
Another person, their first laughter was through these lungs. The first time they might have said, "I love you" to someone was through these lungs. That, to me, is a responsibility to cherish these lungs, that I don't really consider them my own. I consider them a gift and something that I want to treat almost with sacred value.
Hi.
Hey.
Good to see you. So tell me a little bit about how you're doing.
It's been almost 4 years since my lung transplant, and it's just been beautiful. And it's been really the first smooth period of my life when it comes to health. I just daily find myself in nature and looking at just a beautiful view and think, this is exactly why I went through transplant, and this is exactly why these doctors do their work. I really see them as heroes, beautiful souls who go through a lot, but all that work really is worth it. I mean, my life is just incredible.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Bradley, for being open and vulnerable and willing to share your story. It was a true honor to work on it and such an honor to meet you. I'm excited for where you're gonna go next. Let us know.
Yeah, there will always be new adventures, definitely.
As there should be. Take good care, Brad.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. I hope you've enjoyed getting to meet Bradley as much as I have. He's a true inspiration.